Good morning. Welcome to Mindset Matters. My name is Jen Welsh, and I am the team lead for the Encompas program. My colleague joining me today is Kim Grant, and Kim will just throw her camera on here in a quick second. There she is. Kim is a care manager for our Encompas team, and she takes incredible care of the family members who join the Encompas program. On behalf of the Encompas team, it is my pleasure to introduce our guest today, John Flesher. John is a unique guest. He brings over 30 years of policing experience as a retired sergeant with the OPP. He was a shift supervisor, crisis negotiator, and responder, a coach, as well as an OPPA branch executive. He also taught for 10 years within the Police Foundations program at Lambton College. John is now a registered psychotherapist practicing under the supervision of a registered psychologist. He has a master's degree in counseling and a bachelor's of science in criminal justice and law enforcement and sociology. As well, he's been providing counseling support for 5 years, and he is a valued member of the Encompas network. John brings the perspective of being a husband, a father of 2 adult children, and a grandfather to 5. We are very excited to have John with us today, where he will share his story, his passion around instilling hope for recovery and building of resilience. Before we begin, just a quick reminder, we have purposely disabled cameras and microphones so everyone can participate anonymously today. The session will be a Q&A format, so I encourage you to submit your questions and or comments through the Q&A feature. Those questions will come only to the Encompas team, and we will then read them out to ensure anonymity. Welcome to our series today, John. It's so good to have you. I will kick off our session today with some questions. John, you shared with me that you were a police officer for 30 years before getting your master's degree in counseling and becoming a psychotherapist. We're really pleased to have you on the Dalton Associates team supporting our Encompas clients, as well as other first responders from Dalton Associates and your own private practice. Before you walk us through your policing career, can you share a little bit about who you are outside of policing?
Just wondering, did my wife pay you in the script to put the word unique in there?
No, she did not.
It's always funny that I'll joke about something and my wife will point at him and say, "Don't humor him, he'll keep doing it." I am very proud of the fact that I survived 30 years on the OPP. If I play my cards right for the next few weeks, it will be 38 years. My wife and I have been married. For those people that have been around a little while, my wife counted the 30 years that we were married during my policing time in dog years, so she counts that as 210. And as we were discussing before, I have a number of forms of therapy, greatest of which I have 2 adult children that are doing well. I have 5 grandchildren aging in range from 16 down to 2. And any day it's not snowing or icy, I'm on my motorcycle. So you will hear about motorcycle therapy quite often. And that's a connection with some people that I made throughout.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. And because of my anger, again, all credit to my wife, first of all, Faith, and family and friends for still being here, because quite honest, I didn't think I'd still be alive at 61.
Interesting. Well, thank you for sharing that. Can you take us through your policing career? Because of your 30 years, you've seen a lot, done a lot, and I'm sure many that are joining us today will be able to relate to what you're sharing and talking about, including some who may be considering retirement. Just wondering if you can share a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, and because I do work with folks right from recruits through to retirees, as well as spouses and family members, I think it is important to realize that we all have different journeys, and that for those of us that have been policing for a while, the analogy I use is we were generally uncomfortable when the Crown Attorney was supposed to be leading us through the easy part, because we were uncomfortable with that part, the same as a lot of emergency responders are uncomfortable with compliments. And
Mhm.
it's actually during the cross-examination phase that we kind of get into our element, and we're more used to conflict than we're peace.
Right.
And so growing up in Sault Ste. Marie, a lot of us went through Lake Superior State College at that time, now university, and came onto the OPP. And I could tell you, as we were talking earlier, I was born and raised in Sault Ste. Marie. They told me my first posting was Sombra. I had no idea where that was. I had to grab a map and look, and I had less than 2 weeks to get down to, at that time, Brampton, to the academy, and then try and figure out how to a way to get to Detroit where my wife was, get gear kind of stowed away, and then into Sombra for my first day. And I was there for 9 years. Was fortunate enough with Greg Turner to be chosen among 12 applicants to teach at the police college. I was there from 94 to 96. Excellent experience, got to know people all across, and during the Freedom Convoy, to be able to see people that I had taught that were chiefs and deputy chiefs, and to have a very small part of their journey.
For sure.
Coming back from there, was seconded to headquarters for a while because I'd worked a lot with First Nation students, and then from there was promoted, went to Ipperwash, was there for a year and a half in the pressure cooker, and also working Grand Bend at that time, and then had the opportunity policing contract in, at that time, Moore Township, which is now St. Clair Township, where my wife and I have lived for 37 years, I think now. It's always nice when you can move to one stoplight town and still have an hour to Detroit or London as your focal points. And I worked a series of municipal contracts, St. Clair Township and Point Edward, and was fortunate enough in Point Edward that they bought a Harley Davidson. So my 6 years in Point Edward, got paid to ride around on a Harley Davidson, and the $2 a day motorcycle allowance, for those of you that had that experience, won't pay for dry cleaning. We only figured it was for toothpaste because you spend most of your day smiling right around on a motorcycle. So. And then through was able to do some shift sergeant team lead, or as I call the player coach role, for a while. Had some great partners there, and whether you call it retirement, termination, emancipation, in 2015 I retired and started this journey.
Incredible. And how has it been for you since you've retired?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. I took the 6-month early leave, so.
How to babysit a grandpa. Love it.
I either babysat my granddaughter, or she babysat me, depending on who you talk to, for the summer. Did a motorcycle trip to Newfoundland, and that was all a part of the transition. So that in September of 2015, I started my master's, and was quite blessed to have a placement at the Family Counseling Center, which is among a network of Family Service Ontario agencies all across province that provide help to people. And I mean, a lot of the people that are in first responder professions have dealt with those agencies because they offer so many services. And that's where I met a lot of great people, but also was able to hone my skills in a federally accredited agency. But at the same time, I had the passion to work with first responders more frequently. And that's how this brought me around to the opportunity. I'm a sole practitioner, but I'm in a group practice with a number of other people that all have either dad was a cop, husband in law enforcement, some connections, and also some others that have addictions, counseling experience. So, and at least 3 of those folks are all working with Dalton and Encompas as well. So we've got a diverse range of experiences through that agency now.
That's excellent. That is excellent. What made you choose policing as a career? What drew you to the profession? It kept you in it for 30 years.
Like most other 18-year-olds, I had no idea what I wanted to be. I had a interview with the RCMP, and I think it was over before it started, because they said, "You're 18, like, why are you here? You're wasting our time."
Right.
So my father paid for probably one of the best world-renowned psychometrists to do testing. And the three things that they suggested were law enforcement, teaching, and the clergy. So I did the 30 years of policing, did the 2 years at OPC, but then I did a stint for 12 years actually initially, and then another 5 after that, after retirement. Once I retired in 2015, I was asked to go back and teach at Lambton College again. So again, through the police college and Lambton College, I had that opportunity to send people off all across the country actually. And it's always fun to go to places like the Police Memorial in Cleveland and have somebody yelling across the street, "Flash." So that's it's kind of neat.
Lots of great connections. That's excellent.
I think the other thing too is that during my negotiator time, we received really great training, worked with really great folks, and a lot of the skills are transferable. And anybody that's interested in going into that line of work, Gary Nessner has a book, Stalling for Time, which essentially is the basis for the negotiator program. And as I mentioned, quite probably every day, I use some part of that training, first of all, to keep me married, that I have to listen better, but also as far as is working with folks in the counseling field.
Excellent.
So I'm just going to pipe in and start asking some questions here as well. So can you please talk about the impact of policing on your mental health and well-being?
You know, I kind of struggled with whether I was going to talk about this or not, but we're among friends. There is someone that I had worked with before, and they said there was a standing order when I die, and at the postmortem when they crack my skull, they want to be there to know if there's still carnival music playing inside. So as we know, being in policing for a long period of time can wire us differently. And so there are certain things I can tell you something happened, but I can't tell you when it happened. My temporal memory is gone. That's probably one of the most pronounced things. But I think I have more empathy for folks that have been in that field. And I was blessed to have a psychologist who talked about, we all love the beauty of Niagara Falls and we love the water, but we don't think about all the damage that was done to the rocks underneath. And that's natural attrition. And we've all heard the analogies: you can't walk through water without getting wet. You can't walk through a septic tank without getting stuff on you. And that's what happens. And so I carried that to working with people, that you have to find healthy outlets for that stress, for the exposure that you have. We're exposed to things that are unnatural. I quite often say normal is only a setting on a washing machine. Once we take normal and perfect off the table, we can acknowledge that we're all struggling in our own different ways and find healthy ways to deal with it. Denny Lapalme, when he was our fourth psychologist, he said, you know, we say we're fine, and I'll clean up the acronym a little bit, but freaking internalized neurotic emotion. And so I spend a lot of time working with folks, and reminder myself, I have a crap book. My wife bought me a scrapbook and scribbled out the S. And my crap book is where I put the stuff that needs to be processed, but maybe I don't want to share a burden with other people. And that can be whatever anybody names it. Dan Siegel says, name it to tame it. So
I think that's actually an incredible tool, just getting out instead of holding in. And I think it's really important to point out the cumulative stress, right? It's not always that one incident that's going to get you, but it might be that one incident that pushes you over because of everything that you've dealt with. And so I think it's really important for the collective, right, to understand that it's not just you that goes through it. It's a thing that first responders deal with and you pick up over time. So really like the idea of a crap book. Your wife was onto something.
And I'll share with people, my wife, like most wives, is much smarter than me. So we just have to listen. And it actually, that was born out of Dick O'Brien's Resilient Journey. And I don't know if Dick is still traveling or doing his training, but you talked about the shit balls theory, that everyday life throws shit balls at you. And if you don't
Mhm.
find a way to shake it off, it can become very dark and heavy.
Mhm.
And telling my wife about that training, as I would do anything that we would go to, that's where she came up with the idea of the scrapbook and made a big production of scribbling out the S. So,
love that.
and that's the first of 3 scrapbooks.
Wow, that's really powerful. Thank you for sharing. We're going to switch it a little bit. How did you find policing impacted your family and your family life, positively and negatively?
It's funny. My daughter, we always said we are going to have a party for her when she hit 5 foot tall, and she never did. But she tough as nails and probably had the temperament to go into policing. And wisely, she chose to do other things, and now she's a dental assistant and loves it, and has the balance with her family. My son is a full head taller than me. He's like 6'3", 220. And the happiest day of my life was when I found out he was colorblind, because yeah, I didn't have to worry about him going into policing. But one of the things that I did find is that he still carries those instincts, and we're able to talk quite often. And again, the small world department, he could have gone anywhere across the province, and he was posted in Point Edward at the bridge, where I had worked for 6 years. So yes, quite often he has a much deeper voice than I do. So somebody come through, see a little bit of gray hair, see the name tag, and go start to talk, is go, yeah, it's my dad. So it's kind of nice to have that connection.
That's awesome. Can you share, aside from the scrapbook, how you cared about your emotional and mental health over the years? If you did, what the benefit of the hindsight of your clinical perspective, and what are you glad you did or didn't do?
You know, a lot of it again comes from my wife, and she has a criminal justice law enforcement degree. That's where we met. And her instincts were that we didn't need 2 cynical people under the same roof. And it's nice to have that balance. So every morning we walk at 7 a.m. And I have friends who are like, oh, it's too early. But my wife insists that it gets too peoply after that. So that's why we walk at 7. And it's a part of giving back to the community, because quite often we've got a couple of bags with us. We're picking up garbage and different things. And we'll have people kind of look down their nose at us and say, like, why are you doing that? Well, it's our community. We have ownership in it. And that's small part of my policing brain is still alive, that broken windows concept, that, you know, if there's no garbage there, people are less inclined to throw it. But if they see a place full of trash, it's there. And that's kind of been our approach since our childhood growing up in Sault Ste. Marie, was you might not be able to make it better, but make sure it doesn't get any worse. And I used that philosophy during the time that I was a shift supervisor. And probably my most fun time is that Carrie Bedard and I were together. And during that time, we both had that player coach mentality. And if you can have fun, you know, thank people for doing things that they're getting paid to do, it was a pleasure to come to work. And for a lot of my focus now with people is find a way to have fun again, whatever that looks like for you.
Good advice. Now, is there anything in regards to your emotional and mental health over the years that you wish you had done differently?
In case Rob Lethan's looking, I wish it was a firefighter. Then I would have been on calendars. You know what? I really haven't given a lot of thought to the what ifs, because we've truly been blessed between the places that I've been, the things that I've experienced, and you know, and also the tragedies. But each of those have that meme of Nurse Cratchit that doesn't kill us, makes us stronger, and gives us a wicked sense of humor. And that's true. There's so many ways that we taught a long time ago that smile, right? The 5 finger or the 4 fingers and thumb is stress management in life every day. And if you can find a way to smile and laugh, and yeah, I don't mind being the class clown if that's what it takes to lighten the mood. Because as Kevin Gilmartin, who was a great influence on many of us, the more down and depressed we get, the more we need to move and connect, and we tend to isolate, but also the longer our used to list gets to be. So with every client, I ask about their used to list. And quite often I get those smiles. Well, I used to have a motorcycle. I used to play guitar. I used to fish. And getting people reconnected with those things is helpful. And I'm honest with them. I don't have all the right answers, but I don't know a lot of the wrong answers because I tried them and they didn't work. So if I didn't have that experience, I probably wouldn't be in the position that I am at 61, still struggling, still trying to find my place in the world, but in for the fight every day.
Thank you so much for sharing.
That's awesome. And I really just want to, for me, what I heard from what you just shared is just really all about connection and how important it is, whether it's people that you're connected to or an activity, just connection is so important. So that's such a good point, John. Thank you for sharing that. Being in policing and in that community for such a long time, to those that have the mentality of we need to suck it up, it's too late for me, whether people are still working or retired, and they're sitting in that place of not happy, not really healthy connections. What
Kind of saying it is what it is, right?
it is what it is, right? We just need to suck it up. This is what this job is, because we know the job's not going to get any easier, right? Being a helper, and within communities, that's not going to change. But to those that are sitting with that mentality, what are two strategies that you could recommend for people to begin to shift that thinking a little bit?
Well, thank you. And that's a good way of looking at it. So if people want to be very clinical, they talk about it as paradoxical intention. I like to kind of dumb things down for my Charlie Brown head, and it's consider the opposite. So at a time I was looking ready to retire, someone else, I said, are you gonna have a retirement party? And they said, well, I don't think the management would want me to have one. I said, that's all the more reason to have one. And we actually end up having a retirement party for 3 of us at the time. So by doing the opposite, we had a lot of fun. And that's a big part of things, is I consider the opposite. My dad quite often would say, don't let the bastards win.
Mm-hmm.
And so in doing that, challenge those things. If it's not working, then try something else. And have a very good friend who talked about alcoholism being suicide on the installment plan. So rather than taking that approach, go back to what made you happy or where you were in that kind of glory period. So yeah, there's a hardware store in Wallaceburg that never hired security. They hired retired OPP officers, because everybody knew by the gray hair, rapidly advancing forehead, a little bit of extra ballast on the front, that they're retired coppers. Nobody ever stole from them.
Right.
So there are all sorts of things we can do. And I've always said it's harder to hit a moving target. Kelly McGonigal, the psychologist, who quite often says, if you want to heal from anything, add movement to it. And so in my family counseling center days, what we would talk about is set a goal for today. And if you haven't been off the couch in a week, then why don't you walk to the doorknob today? Tomorrow, why don't you walk to the front door? Maybe the next day it'll be to get your own mail rather than have someone get it. And again, we were so blessed to have people that would lose 150, 175 pounds just by taking that first step. And we'll use some of the things that we've found that, yes, when we're clinically depressed, it might take 5 times the energy to do a basic task. But once you do it, you're 5 times stronger than the average person. And it's kind of cool to savor those victories when you can get them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Love that. Quick question from our audience for you, John. We have one of our guests is looking for you to repeat the name of the negotiators book that you mentioned earlier.
See if I can hold it up well. Stalling for time. It's pronounced Nessner, but the spelling is a little bit different.
Okay, Noesner. That's wonderful.
And as my former shift sergeant partner, Carrie Bedard, and longtime negotiator, will tell you that there's also a great article on the FBI bulletins. If, like my wife and I, you ascribe to the Scrooge McDuck work smarter, not harder theory, there's actually an FBI bulletin article that is Nessner and Webster together. And again, Canadian and American counterparts coming together. And for people going into the counseling field, it's a really great kind of primer as to how the negotiator skills and counseling skills come together.
Okay, awesome. That's great. How do you feel leaders within policing organizations can make positive differences in diminishing the stigma around caring for one's mental health?
I was at the motorcycle show on Saturday in Toronto doing motorcycle therapy and running into some people that I had taught previously and some people that had been on the Golden Helmets and shared experiences of showing up in April with a coffee cup still frozen to their hand. And we were wondering where the course is that some leaders and politicians go that their answer is so long that you forget what the question is. So I'll answer that question with kind of a statement that Carl Rogers' 3 core conditions of counseling would be really appropriate for leaders as well. And that's active listening to the point that you develop an empathy for the person. Congruence, which is the big one. Your actions are in harmony with what you say, because there's nothing worse than somebody saying something and then doing the opposite. And the other is unconditional positive regard. And I think by demonstrating that, that's great. And in fairness to commissioners that we've had, that with best intentions, because we are a large deployed agency, it is like Crown attorneys. It starts with a great idea here, and like the old Plinko game on Price is Right, each time it hits another peg, it changes direction. And anybody on the OPP or other services have been at different places around the province, each Crown attorney's office is run like its own kingdom. And in that, everything is different. So 1983, I did a paper on the impact of stress and burnout in policing 2 years before I was hired. And the 2 main aggravating factors for people's mental health were the administration and courts. 40 years later, look how far we've come, or not. Because those are still things that I'm hearing.
Right. Do you think there's been a shift around stigma? We're having those conversations, we're seeing that change within the workplace?
Yeah, thank you. And to bring it back to a positive, yes. And I think it's because of folks like you and Kim and all of the other caring people that are hearing people, and for people that call in and say, I felt heard from that very first phone call, that's very important. But also things like debriefs being held within the first week and not years later is a great development. But also, when Brian Noller does his presentations, he talks quite often about the counsel he received from someone that once you retire, you're just another old person on a park bench. And to a certain degree, some of our folks feel that not only when they're retired, but when they're off injured. And again, there's still that difference between if you break your arm, people check and see how you're doing, and are you switching hands in the typical cop humor. But if it's something else that's occupational stress related, they tend to feel like they're in a leper colony and no one calls anymore. So it's quite often, and I know to get that card, old school to slow everything down, text message, whatever it is, but have somebody thinking of you, that's very important.
Absolutely. Question from a guest about the return to work process. tends to be quite stressful for most employees due to a work culture that's still struggling to see mental health as a legitimate health issue. What advice would you give to anyone who's feeling anxiety about their return to work?
Biggest thing is I just did is breathe.
Breathe. Breathe.
I like to think if we can stay somewhere in the middle of the screen, we're doing okay. If we're too high, we're anxious, breathing and grounding techniques. If we're too low, moving and connecting. And the way I'm tying that in is if you're Bob or Sally or Sue or whoever you are, get more people on your team. It's very easy to think that the OPP is a very large, glacially, slowly moving organization. And I learned that quite often WSIB was, the world's slowest inept bureaucracy, although that too is improving. So getting more people on your side, and that's through our association, people like Wayne White that have specific expertise with WSIB. We now have an occupational nurse or doctor that have that experience, because in past it was a bunch of people sitting around smoking cigars, drinking scotch, doing the Christians or Lions as to, whether you lived or died on the OPP. And none of that was fair. So is it perfect yet? No. But again, reach out. There are so many different supports through not only Encompas, but Boots on the Ground, Badge of Life Canada, Wounded Warriors. Some people still, because of that fear of being burned, will go to outside agencies. If that's the case, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but make sure that it's a federally accredited agency, that you're not going to go someone that's going to cause you more harm at a time that you're vulnerable. Right. So when in doubt, ask is my advice in dealing with that. And I can tell you, I was chewed up and spit out by the system in 2013. And I was adamant again with that don't let the bastards win philosophy that I was going to go back to work. And I did a negotiator call in the City of London on my last day shift and worked my last 2 night shifts. I went out the way I came in. And that to me was not only pride on my part, but certain amount, it was flicking the bird at some of the people who said, yeah, you'll never finish. So whatever motivates you to do it. But the analogy I was given is it's like a bucket of water, right? Your hand comes out and you'll be replaced. So do everything you can to stay as healthy and happy as you can, so that you and your family can enjoy that time after the OPP, because there will be more time after the OPP than there was during the OPP.
Absolutely. Love that. Again, connection, right? The importance of connection and finding your community that is able to provide you that support as you navigate the returning to work process, for sure. We have a guest that just wanted to say thanks for sharing today. They're not able to stay on and for the entire presentation, but they just wanted to extend their thanks and gratitude for sharing. Also, someone looking for the name of the book you spoke about, the 3 Principles book. You could share that one.
The 3 core principles, that's anything Carl Rogers, client-centered or person-centered therapy. The book that I quite often share, because at my lowest, it was given to me, is a book called The 4 Agreements.
The 4 Agreements,
and
yes.
The 4 Agreements, don't make assumptions, don't take it personally, be impeccable with your word. And the way that I like to really reinforce that one is, especially in emergency responder families, be impeccable with your word is before you speak. Is it magic you're going to upbuild your partner, or is it poison that you're gradually doing harm to them? And with that added degree of care, it really helps, because the Gottman Institute, who are the go-to people as far as couples therapy, you can bank 5 good things, but 1 negative word or event, and all 5 of those good things disappear. So to be careful with all of that.
Words matter. Words matter
Absolutely.
for sure. Do you believe that we'll ever be able to prevent operational stress injuries like PTSD with the work that's happening now and the conversations that are happening? Do you see that ever becoming a reality where we're able to prevent things like PTSD?
Tough question. I wish we could,
Mhm.
but I will sort of temper that with the idea that, first of all, the more we talk about resiliency front end will help, but we look for caring people to come into this profession, and it isn't trauma. And I have to share that with people quite often. Civilians think it's the gross stuff, or as one of my longtime friends said, the goo on the highway. And it's not it. It's relational trauma. So that the more we care about people, the more vulnerable we are. But what I think is really important is that if we do develop it, and I mean, as a post-traumatic stress survivor, and there are many of us around the province, we don't talk enough about post-traumatic growth. And that's the thing, is that on the other side of it, we can be better husbands or wives, better parents, better hockey coaches, whatever the case may be, if we put our focus on the important things in life. And I love Mike Myers. It's a part of my Six Sense humor, but he did a movie about the airline industry. And he says, sometimes we put the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable. And so if we're focusing on the wrong things, we can get stuck. And for a lot of us, and I've worked with a number of retirees who say, it took us a while to kind of get over ourselves. Our identity was kind of rooted in that policing part, but we're human beings, not human doings. And quite often we can transfer those skills to, right? Like there are so many things we're exposed to in a 30-year policing career. And we forget sometimes that all of that gives us the discipline and to go to the, different vaccination clinics. There's people there working because you have no issue visiting with people, setting clear direction and following. So there are volunteer opportunities, there are part-time opportunities. I joke with people quite often. The reason I'm working is my wife likes a clean house and won't dust around me. I needed to find somewhere to be at least 3 days a week. And when she cranks the Bay City rollers, it's time for me to hop on my motorcycle and get out of town.
And that works for you. That's something that works. Absolutely. Well, that leads us into our next question. That's quite telling. Want to talk a little bit about spouses and how does a spouse outside of policing support their spouse that is either a civilian or a uniform member? How do they support them on a day-to-day? What are some strategies that they can use on a day-to-day sort of basis? And conversely, how does the member, the spouse in the field, how do we share with our spouse that today's been a tough day without exposing them to lots of the trauma that we've seen and dealt with?
Great question.
That is a good question.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, our hearts with Louise today, but I mean, these are killer questions. I love all of those.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing, the same as the Gottmans would say, is to not assume, communicate. And the training that I received at the Family Counseling Center was really important, is to keep with the I messages, not the you, because each time there's the you, then there's the defensiveness, and that goes to a part of it. But also to be able to have that outlet, to be able to communicate. I had showed this question to my wife and she said, well, do you remember when they invited all of us to the Gilmartin presentations? So when Dalton's and Encompas are doing the seminar in April, that's the opportunity for folks to come out. And as families, and yes, to be a lot of funny giggling and finger pointing at, that's you, kind of stuff going on. But to know that these are things that happen. So Gilmartin talks about the biological roller coaster, that you go way up here off screen and you don't just come to here, you crash as far down. So any of us that ever worked Wasaga Beach or Grand Bend or those kind of places where you go from 1,000 population off season to 30,000 people that come to drink and fight and whatever else. Great adrenaline rush, but really heavy crash. To
Mhm.
understand those type of things. But beyond that, first party reports, like Valley Stone was married to a Toronto police officer. She wrote a book, Cops Don't Cry, and talked about some of those personal things. The name escapes me because at my age it happens quite often. There's a lady who writes about, you know, I love a cop, I married a cop, and just searching those, you can find many of those resources out there from a firsthand lived experience of being with a first responder. But yes, that ability to say, you know, I had a really crappy shift, I can't talk about it now. Can we take a walk, whatever the case may be. I shared one particular shift in my 30-year career with a counselor, and she told me later she was vicariously traumatized and off work for 3 weeks. That's one shift of 30 years.
Wow.
Right. So it gives you that idea of being able to say, I'm struggling, you know, and the spouse to be able to say, what do you need? How can I help?
That's excellent. Another great question coming at us here. We talk a lot about supporting first responders, and we're starting to talk about, we're talking more about the spouse and the family dynamic. Can we kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about children of members who are suffering from an OSI? What can we do for the children in the family to best support them, to help them understand what their mom or dad or grandparent, aunt, uncle is navigating?
There are a lot of great resources out there, and I think the lady's name is Aureen Wagner, but it's the idea of how to talk to your kids about anxiety. And just that idea of, and unfortunately, probably the best advice I got after I was diagnosed with PTSD was a lady that had a lifetime working in corrections, right? So, and placing 95% of the people respect the shirt, the other 5 want to rip it off you and shove it down your throat or some other orifice with a southerly exposure. In corrections, it's 100% people in there that are criminals. So she suggested to me, don't let your diagnosis become your identity. You're more than that. So to be able to first of all, validate that mommy or daddy is struggling with something, but beyond that, that together we're stronger and work at things. So trying to think how to put it. At a time that they probably least want to go and do things, that's the time that they need to, as a family, come together and do those things. And when the power goes out, everybody's upset. But when you sit and play the board games, that's when the memories are made.
100%.
So in the same way, when this, you never know when the waves are going to hit.
Embrace them.
Yeah. So knowing
I'm
that
doing it with you.
Yeah. To know that there's somebody there with a paddle or a stand-up paddle board or whatever, that there's somebody there with you. If you go on the Canadian Forces site, one of the first things you're going to see is you're not alone. And that's what's really important. So to have, each of you there, and that has been my experience. I can call some companies and I get put all on hold for 35 minutes or 40 and then hung up on, or somebody treat you badly. Anytime that I've ever called Dalton's, I get somebody that I can tell by their voice that they're smiling.
Mm.
So that's important from that first approach, to know that it's people that care. And having been at conferences with folks like Carl and Louise and others that I've met, everyone has genuinely cared about the people that they're providing
Mhm.
the services for.
Yeah, I would say that and I think Kim, you would agree, people first, right?
Absolutely.
People first. Above anything, people first, not process. And we really try to humanize every single person because they matter wherever they are in their journey, wherever they are. We will meet you, right? I think that's a big piece.
And I think that's kind of what we were thinking when we renamed Mindset Matters, is the lived experiences connecting people. Because John, you've said time and time again, that connection, no matter who it's with, whoever you have on your side, whoever you have on your team, you're building that team, that's what's going to support you, right? And that's going to be your foundation of getting through, is just connecting with people and putting people first. And that leads us into another comment that was made. One of our attendees just said, thank you so much for being human.
Love that.
And you said, like, you don't know when those waves are going to hit. And for the three of us here, I'm trying to hold back my tears, you guys.
They hit.
And that's the thing, is that it can hit at any time. And it's okay to show that emotion, because letting it out is what prevents us from keeping it in and pushing it down further. So I just wanted to share that, because that was such a beautiful comment.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, it's messed up. I have one longer thumbnail, and during my policing career, quite often you would stand there digging your thumbnail into the other cuticle, causing yourself physical pain, so you didn't show emotion.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a poker face anyway. My daughter has even less of a poker face, so she doesn't like you, instantly. So it's always funny, especially in a crowd setting.
So Jen, I'm just going to pop into one of the questions that we also had based around that post-traumatic growth that John had mentioned earlier, if you don't mind.
Perfect. Yeah, great.
John, you just kind of had mentioned that we often focus on the diagnosis of PTSD, but we never really, or it's just kind of coming up, talking about that post-traumatic growth. And so understanding so well kind of what first responders go through, what our members and our police officers go through. And now with your added perspective and training as a counselor as well, are there any key messages or strategies that you'd like to share with the participants around post-traumatic growth and what to do post-diagnosis?
Yeah. So our past doesn't dictate our future, but it prepares us for it. Peter Levine, probably the best $20 I've spent outside of spoiling my grandchildren with candy and other stuff that their parents don't want them to have.
All the
That's
good
in our
things.
job description. Is I bought a book called Healing Trauma that Peter Levine wrote. And he started by studying animals in the wild. And if the predator attacked the prey, what they would see is if they lived, they would shake it off and run away. And unfortunately, they don't stand there and get too deep in thought. And for many of us, myself included, who tend to overthink things, depression at its root is overthinking. And if there's any grandmothers out listening today, there's a great article, The Friendship Bench in Zimbabwe. Don't ask me to spell that. But they actually built benches out front so that the kids of the community could come and,
I saw this.
and get, that life experience, but the grandmothers could feel like they have meaning.
Absolutely.
And so for those of you on the OPP or OPPA members that haven't taken training with Gwen Carr, she is a lovely lady. And I was exposed to so many different great resources from the PACE training. And Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning was probably game changer for me and for anybody in that position of coming to retirement or dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis, he quotes Nietzsche in saying that if you have a why, you can endure any what or how. And so that why can be your spouse, your children, your grandchildren, because face it, grandchildren, it's all of the fun and only half the responsibility. Having fun. Canadian Forces soldiers come back that have been traumatized. They give them a ukulele and people laugh. But it gets both hemispheres of the brain working together and their hands busy. Bessel van der Kolk wrote a great book, The Body Keeps a Score. Brain is saying, I'm fine. Body saying bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about Bessel van der Kolk, when he was interviewed, said, if you want to heal from trauma, run marathons or do yoga. Most of us aren't built to run marathons. Yoga depends. I'm more the type that would watch College Humor if Gandhi took a yoga class because it makes me laugh. That would be my therapy rather than doing yoga. But I find the rhythmic movement, stretching, breathing is all very helpful. I have very proudly wear my OPP retirement watch that shows that, yes, I made it to the finish line, but on the other wrist, I have a Fitbit. So I can keep track of my resting heart rate. I can keep track of my steps. And if it's a day I don't feel like doing anything, it's back to that paradoxical intention, or consider the opposite. That kicks my butt to say, get out and move.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those things. And I have a good friend that was in command in fire, and he struggled after he retired as to who he was. And he took one photography course, and now he travels all over Canada, capturing not the ugliest, like you saw in his fire career, but the prettiest parts of Canada. And so I'd encourage people to do that as well, is focus on the positive, savor those positive things. I have a friend who works in hospice, and she says, rather than wolfing down a whole Hershey chocolate bar, break it into individual squares, put the individual square on your tongue or under your tongue and savor it. Mm-hmm. And if you can savor your life after a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, you won't have to look for growth. You'll already be there.
That's amazing.
That is amazing. That is just amazing. I love that so much. John, there's someone that just wanted to say that you're not alone. They're very proud of you. It's going to make me teary and proud to call you a friend. Kim, over you.
So just being cognizant of time, before we get into any further questions, there's one last question that I would like to ask, because it is something that I've been really curious about, and I'm sure other people are curious about it too. But you have a whole career, you have 30 years in policing, that's huge. You have all of the things that you've done outside of it. You're a grandpa, husband, father. One of the things I've always been curious about is, in your profile, you completed your Master of Arts in Counseling Psychology, and it's something that you had mentioned helped you in your own healing journey. So I was just wondering if you can share very briefly kind of why you decided to go that route post-career once you retired.
As I mentioned earlier, a number of us, including my younger brother and some lifelong friends, people that are still on the OPP, came through the Lake State program. And we had to take psychology courses as a part of the criminal justice law enforcement program. And I would have a psych professor stand up and talk about her imaginary friend and different things. And another lady would be describing Down syndrome, and she'd go, oh, that's me, based on her appearance. I mean, we come into this line of work because we struggle with things, but that gives us some authentic part of that. I was very angry when I left. I talk about one of the rare dates I remember, November 5th, 2013, as my stress fracture day. This hand was broken. At one time or another, I've broken every finger on my left hand as well. So I wish that officers would have been given the anger iceberg the same time they were given a copy of Kevin Gilmartin's Emotional Survival, because it's a very helpful tool to be able to say, okay, I'm angry, but like the iceberg that took down the Titanic, the top ninth is showing. You can see that, you can steer around it. It's the stuff below the surface, the feelings that you don't deal with, that cause us that anger. And I wish I would have known that. So being able to dissipate that anger was a big part of the healing, learning that through the process, actually through my master's and through Family Counseling Center. That was a big start for a lot of us before we went off into private practice. But learning about anger, learning about anxiety, learning about depression all helped me. But also when people were struggling or now struggling coming in, I could say, I've been there. Our stories aren't the same, but this is what I learned from trying these 5, 10, 50 things that didn't work. That what did work is, and in some cases as well, to be even more blessed to have one of our clients say, I learned this, and I would be honored if you could share this with other people. So during the 8 months of doing my master's practicum, and for those that have done it, it seems much longer, but also you make a lot of lifelong connections with other people in a caring, helping field.
One of our guests today, John, just shared that very piece. Having served 30 years in policing, this member shared he experienced significant pieces during his career and post-retirement, separation, divorce, depression, financial stress, some alcohol abuse, PTSD, and an OSI. He found that your lived experience matched with your clinical work has helped him move forward. And he just wanted to say thank you.
Oh, thank you. And again, here's another jab at Rob. Keep them coming. Opinions vary, right? If we wanted to be loved, we would have been firefighters. So
lots of thank yous coming your way today, John.
Lots of little floating hearts going up the side of the screen as well. People sending you love and saying thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. You never really know. And I mean, you kind of have those Sally Field moments where, like, is anyone going to show up? You know, is this going to be Jen and Kim and Eric and I sitting here?
Talking. It was a wonderful hour with you. And if you could leave us with, moving forward for anybody listening today, 3 things that they can take with them, whether they're a brand new member of the OPPA, an OPP starting out their career, somebody in the middle of their career, and then someone closer to retiring, thinking about retirement. 3 things to take away.
You're going to have to keep count.
Okay.
First thing I think is stay connected. So for those just coming into the field, don't say goodbye to your friends outside of policing. It's nice to keep that balance.
So important.
Yeah.
Second thing, if there is a place, a thing, a smell, quite often we forget of the 5 senses, the sense of smell is the strongest. So I keep cherry blistex because sometimes it's just nice to have another smell, especially if you're around death and trauma and trouble all the time, to be able to remember we have 5 senses for a reason and try and use those. So second point, I know I've kind of combined a few together, is be out in nature. The Japanese call it nature bathing. Even the federal government that are glacially slow in making decisions have realized that giving federal parks passes out through doctors is healing. Third is find a way to laugh, even as I do at myself most of the time. Even self-deprecating humor is healthy. It's all a part of healing. And if you're not finding the healing or whatever it is, go to music, go to comedies. Somewhere in your past, I use the solution-focused lens quite often. So go back to that time. What were you doing differently? And a lot of times it'll be 70s, 80s music where it's something. Little River Band has a song, Cool Change. Dolphins are the most intelligent mammal in the ocean, but through that whole 3 or 4 minutes, they're just jumping up and down in the ocean and chirping at each other. If you're a hockey fan, Letterkenny Hockey Chirps does the same thing. Whatever it is, find a way to do that and feed your soul through whatever way makes you smile and laugh and stay connected with other people.
I love that so much. John, on behalf of our Encompass team, I want to thank you so much for your sharing today. You've encouraged us to be vulnerable and keep fit and laugh and connect. And I just really want to thank you for sharing.
Well,
Kim?
I agree. I think that, and somebody had said it in our Q&A, thank you for showing the vulnerability is okay. Thank you for showing us that we're all human, no matter what our experience is. And I absolutely just love those 3 points that you gave in laughing, staying connected, get out in nature. I am so grateful that you took the time out of your day to come and speak with us all. And I'm just truly grateful that we have you on our team and that we have you available to other members. So thank you so much for sharing your story today.
If anyone viewing today, John, is interested in getting connected to you, are you open to sharing an email address?
Yeah, 100%. So my wife and I were probably among the first 10 to sign up for those Simpatico addresses before we realized you could be creative with it. So it's just John Flesher, Flesher. I still have somebody I work with still thinks my name is Fletcher and called me Fletch, but so john.flesher@simpatico.ca.
john.flesher@simpatico.ca. That's nice and easy.
Yeah.
Nice and easy. Well, again, so much gratitude, John. This has been a wonderful hour that has flown right by. And again, our thanks to you for sharing today.
Well,
And leaving us with some incredible, 3 things that we can all take with us.
Absolutely.
Easy things that we can use and work through, making ourselves better each and every day.
Well,
so again, our thanks.
Thank you for the opportunity. I never would have suggested this on my own. So thank you for that nudge.
Very welcome.
One last note is anybody who did not get that triple repeated email address, you can come through Encompass and we'll be happy to connect you with John.
Absolutely.
Nice and easy.
Yeah, and I would suggest that to people anyway. Go on the Dalton website and check and see. I may not be the right fit for them, but there are a lot of people that we have officers that have undercover policing experience. We have people that have regional policing experience, municipal policing experience. So that's another way to do your due diligence and finding the right fit, and then care managers will assist you in that journey further. But yeah, start your window shopping.
Absolutely.
Thank you
Excellent.
so much.
Well, wishing you a wonderful day and with your family and your wife, and enjoy your motorcycle as we get some warmer weather. And
thank you so much for everybody in joining us today as well.
Yes, and thank you to our attendees. We hope that you've had a wonderful hour with us, and take good care of yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.